People generally think of Hitler at the Eagle's Nest, Eva Braun's home movies, or they think of him perhaps in the bunker in Berlin. But in reality, he spent over 800 days at the Wolf's Lair. It was by far the most used of all his headquarters.
We are going to talk about Adolf Hitler's final days, but the story you know, the bunker, the fire, the end, might be the greatest lie ever told. For decades, one officer kept a terrifying secret. He was part of an inner circle that planned not a final stand, but an escape. Now, his confession has surfaced. It describes a secret mission, a phantom plane leaving a burning Berlin, and a new life in South America. What he says is terrifying, and it changes everything we thought we knew about the end of the global conflict. The officer's story begins. Berlin, April 1945. The city was not just a city anymore. It was a ruin of smoke, fire, and vengeance. Allied bombers had turned the sky crimson, and Soviet artillery was getting closer with every hour, the explosions walking block by block toward the center of the Reich. Inside the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler's empire was collapsing. But here's the catch. Deep beneath the ruins, in the maze of tunnels under Berlin, another battle was underway. This one was not for victory, but for survival. A plan known to only a handful of men was being activated, Operation Second Sunrise. Its purpose was simple, the preservation of the Third Reich's leadership and its massive wealth, far beyond the reach of the Allies. The man directing this was not a general obsessed with phantom armies, it was Martin Bormann, Hitler's loyal shadow, the man who controlled all access to the Führer. And beside him worked an unnamed logistics officer, a man who would decades later claim to have helped orchestrate the greatest vanishing act in history. Above ground, the Reich was meeting its end. But underground, in the concrete depths of the Führer bunker, precision replaced panic. Maps were spread across tables, but they did not show front lines. They showed red pencil lines tracing routes south toward Bavaria, Switzerland, and Spain. Couriers dodging shellfire carried encrypted messages through the U-Bahn tunnels to hidden airstrips that were still somehow operational. Publicly, Hitler was heard raging about fighting to the last man. He was decorating teenage soldiers in the Chancellery garden for the cameras. But privately, he and his inner circle were preparing to disappear. The officer, let's call him Officer K, had his orders. In early April, they seemed simple. Oversee the evacuation of essential archives and personnel. It sounded like another doomed military directive, that is, until a coded message arrived from Bormann himself. It read, "The future of the Reich will not end in Berlin." That was the moment Officer K understood. This was not defense. This was an escape. The operation began with a very unusual list of priorities. Not troops, not ammunition. The priorities were gold bullion, stacks of forged passports, priceless works of art, and dozens of crates labeled medical equipment. The crazy part? No one was allowed to inspect them. One night, Officer K followed a guarded convoy through the shattered streets to an airfield on Berlin's outskirts. Under the eerie glow of floodlights, he saw the cargo being loaded into a Junkers Ju-52, a paratrooper transport plane now repurposed for freight. The manifest listed the destination simply as Operation Serpent. When he asked Bormann's adjutant what that meant, the man replied without looking at him, "It's for after." Morale in the bunker fell apart. The generals had disputes, the officers were drinking, and the shelling was so close that the concrete walls trembled. But in one airtight chamber, Bormann was calm. He was signing papers that would later be found in Swiss banks and Argentine companies. He was surrounded by secretaries and couriers. A spider in the center of a collapsing web, Bormann knew the military battle was over. But the ideology, the organization, and the capital, the money, could still live on. He reportedly told Officer K, "Men's ends do not end empires. Empires perish when memory does. We will be there to keep it alive." It was April 20th, Hitler's last birthday. This was the last time he was seen by cameras, shaking hands with those young soldiers. But what the pictures did not show was the meeting that took place later that night. A meeting with Bormann, Himmler, and the chief of the Gestapo, Heinrich Müller. That conference, according to the officer's later testimony, decided the fate of the Reich. Bormann had a detailed evacuation plan ready to go. It included air routes through Allied Spain, sea convoys to South America, and safe houses already prepared and waiting in the remote mountains of Patagonia. Hitler, described as a trembling, broken man, gave his consent with a single word: proceed. Officer K was reassigned. His new job was to direct the SS units guarding the secret entrance to the Tempelhof airfield, where a special passenger plane was already waiting. From the airfield, they could see the flashes of Soviet tanks in the city center. But the couriers kept coming, exchanging sealed envelopes. Under the turmoil, the foundation for a new Reich was being laid. From a ruined rooftop, Officer K watched Berlin burn. He realized this was no longer a war for survival. It was the perfect cover for slipping away. He would, many years later, recount that night with chilling words. That week, the Reich did not fall. It merely moved to a different continent. For decades, this officer's story was dismissed. Then, in the late 1970s, a frail man emerged from the shadows in South America. He was living under a false name. He was the man we call Officer K. His confession, so detailed and so unsettling, reignited a question the world thought was long buried. "I was there," he said. "I helped him leave Berlin alive." His descent into this ultimate secrecy began with that personal order from Martin Bormann: assist in Operation Serpent, the secure transport of a special passenger. He described the tunnels under Berlin, a sprawling network over 50 miles long, connecting the Chancellery to secret U-Bahn stations and even Tempelhof. His first task was moving those sealed containers. The Red Crosses were a lie. They held gold bars, counterfeit British and American currency from the top-secret Operation Bernhard, and secret documents. "We were burying the Reich in plain sight," he recalled, "not to destroy it, but to resurrect it elsewhere." By late April, the artillery was constant. Yet below ground, an eerie calm persisted. The officer described entering a dim chamber where Hitler sat trembling, flanked by Bormann, Eva Braun, and Gestapo Chief Müller. "He looked smaller than the legend," the officer said, "a man drowning in silence but still calculating." That evening, the conspiracy was confirmed. The plan was a double switch. Two bodies, prepared to look like Hitler and Eva Braun, were to be swapped. The officer claimed they were a distant relative of Hitler's who had been brought to the bunker and a captured actress who bore a striking resemblance to Braun. They were to be used to create the final scene for the Soviets. These two individuals would be ended, their remains, dressed in the Führer's and Braun's clothes, would be carried to the garden, doused in gasoline, and incinerated. A handful of loyal witnesses were chosen. They were told exactly what to say, a story they would repeat for the rest of their lives. "It had to be absolutely perfect," the officer said. "The world had to stop doubting." Shady dental records, similar uniforms, and carefully placed firearm wounds, every measure was taken to complete the illusion. The Führer insisted on the control of his legend, Officer K stated. Then on April 30th, 1945, as Soviet forces were just blocks from the Chancellery, a secret message was dispatched: Eagle ready to fly. Officer K, with a small troop of loyal SS, guided a small group through the smoking U-Bahn tunnels. They emerged near a deserted railway line where two armored lorries were waiting. A person in a simple military coat, face concealed under a hat, was sitting inside one of the trucks. "He remained silent," the officer remarked, "but when I saluted, he lifted his hand and I could tell the tremor." The convoy raced to Tempelhof airfield. A Junkers Ju-52 was waiting, its engines already running. Officer K supervised the loading. Medical chests, sealed files, and a few personal suitcases. Just before getting on the plane, the man in the coat spun around. His voice was soft, but the officer never forgot the words: "This is not the end for Germany." A few seconds later, the plane took off into the night and was lost, heading west. Officer K kept this secret for more than 30 years, but he was constantly reminded by his guilt. "I thought I was doing my nation a service," he unburdened, "but I was empowering a lie that had become immortal." His narrative matched up perfectly with declassified OSS files. These files, buried for decades, talked about a mysterious, unscheduled flight from Berlin to northern Germany on April 30th, 1945. It was a ghostly imprint of history's greatest disappearing act. When an interviewer asked Officer K where the plane went after refueling in Germany, he said merely, "To Spain, to bye," and then to the new Reich. But escaping Berlin was just the first step. The real challenge was funding a new empire in secret. Building a new Reich in secret. Long before Berlin fell, Martin Bormann was already constructing what historians would later call the Invisible Reich. This was the real Operation Second Sunrise. While generals obsessed over collapsing fronts and phantom armies, Bormann shifted the war's true battlefield. He moved it to banks, corporations, and secret vaults across neutral Europe and South America. He understood what few others did. Armies could be destroyed, but money, real hard assets, endured. And with enough of it, an empire could live forever without borders, uniforms, or flags. Bormann was not a soldier. He was a strategist cloaked in bureaucracy. He was the quiet administrator who controlled every single mark that fueled the Nazi machine. And what most people don't realize is he started his plan as early as 1942. While the Reich was at the height of its power, Bormann was already planning for its defeat. He began consolidating the Reich's finances. He channeled staggering fortunes from industrial giants like IG Farben, Krupp, and Daimler-Benz into a series of secret accounts. These were not small sums. We're talking about stolen gold from conquered nations, looted art worth billions, and massive war profits. This river of wealth flowed into neutral Switzerland, fascist-friendly Spain, and neutral Portugal. It was all done through a web of front companies. These companies posed as suppliers of post-war reconstruction materials. In truth, they were the financial foundations for a Reich meant to survive its own demise. The SS officer, Officer K, recalled his first meeting with Bormann about this. He didn't speak of victory, the officer said, he spoke of continuity. In Bormann's office, the maps showed not troop movements, but shipping routes and financial corridors. There were lines linking Berlin to Zurich, Madrid, Lisbon, and most importantly, Buenos Aires, Argentina. These were not evacuation plans, they were blueprints for a shadow economy. An economy designed to absorb the Reich's fading wealth like a sponge through a network of quiet bankers and sympathetic government officials. Bormann converted millions of Reichsmarks into Swiss francs, US dollars, and Argentine pesos. The funds then flowed into South American factories, massive ranches, and shipping firms. This isn't just a theory. Declassified Allied intelligence later confirmed that by 1944, German capital was flooding Argentina at record levels. One secret OSS report from that time called Buenos Aires a financial lifeboat for the Nazi elite. And get this, a now famous declassified document, the Red House Report, details an actual meeting that proves this. On August 10, 1944, in Strasbourg, France, Bormann's top agents met with Germany's most powerful industrialists. They knew the war was lost. The report states they were instructed to prepare for a post-war commercial campaign. Their plan was to send all their money and best engineers out of Germany. They would fund the Nazi Party from overseas. They would build front companies, buy property, and wait. They would place their technicians in American factories where they would learn new secrets. When the time was right, they would be ready to rise again. This was not a guess. This was a documented plan. The officer's confession backs this up. "We were given lists of names," Officer K said. "Shell companies, La Estrella Shipping in Buenos Aires, Compañía Industrial del Sur." They sounded normal, but they were all Bormann. They were all hollow, waiting to be filled with gold. And the numbers are just staggering. Conservative estimates, based on declassified bank records, suggest Bormann funneled at least $800 million in 1945 money. That's the equivalent of over $50 billion today, and that's just what we know about. But Bormann was not just bringing out money, he was bringing out people. This was Operation Continuität. Continuity. Scientists, engineers, SS officers, and industrial specialists were all silently prepared for transfer assignments. Their documents were forged by the Gestapo, their identities were changed, their destinations were disguised as diplomatic relocations or corporate transfers. Bormann's order was crystal clear: keep the knowledge, keep the capital, keep the power. Even as the Allies were closing in, Bormann's power inside the bunker never declined. In fact, it grew. His signature had more value than any general's. He determined who visited Hitler and what reports got to his desk. If Himmler was the regime's iron fist, Bormann was its unseen hand. "The Führer leads the war," as Bormann reportedly said. "I lead what comes after." What came after was a network so complex, so vast, that it would take decades to even begin to unravel. Swiss records, forced open by investigators in the 1990s, showed thousands of coded deposits. They were linked to those same shell companies, all formed in 1943 and 1944. These companies, listed under neutral or South American names, all got their money from the same accounts in Berlin, Vienna, and Prague. Gold from the Reichsbank was melted down, its identity hidden. It was then exported as industrial bullion. Priceless paintings and artifacts, thousands of them, were not just for Hitler's museum, they were collateral. They were liquid assets, traded in neutral ports for cash, diamonds, and most importantly, political favors. Officer K said that in the beginning of 1945, Bormann called him for a last order. "We can't win here," Bormann told him, "but we can make sure that the Reich lives on in other places." He gave Officer K a folder. It was filled with coded routes and contact names in Spain and Argentina. "In case of Berlin's fall," Bormann said, "these will be of more importance than any victory." When the city finally fell, those routes were put into action, ships leaving from Spanish ports, submarines disappearing in the South Atlantic, and at last, planes landing on secret Patagonian airstrips. Every single movement had been meticulously planned, years in advance. And hidden within that invisible empire, funded by that shadow bank, was one purpose above all: to prepare the path for the Führer's escape. The money was secure. The people were chosen. Now they just needed a way to cross the ocean. Wolf's route to freedom. As the Nazi Empire crumbled on land, its final refuge and its last chance at survival was the ocean. Beneath the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic, a secret operation was already in motion. Its name was Operation Seawolf. But here's the deal: this operation had little to do with warfare. These were not patrols sent to sink Allied ships. They were voyages of silence. They were meant to transport people. Gold and secrets the Reich could not allow to be captured. By late 1944, Martin Bormann and the head of the Navy, Admiral Karl Dönitz, had drawn up a list. It was a list of special submarines designated for special cargo. These were the most advanced subs in the world, the Type 21 Electroboots. They could stay submerged for days, running on silent electric motors. They were perfect for a ghost mission. They were stripped of their torpedoes and ammunition. The U-boats were refitted to carry watertight containers. Special passengers and classified documents engineers sworn to secrecy installed hidden compartments. These compartments were even lined with lead, designed to disguise their metallic signatures from Allied sonar. Officially, these vessels formed part of Germany's last naval defense. In truth, they were escape arteries. They were the lifelines of a dying empire. Among them were two submarines destined for infamy, U-530 and U-977. Both of these U-boats vanished in the war's final days. They defied direct orders to surrender to the Allies. For months, they were presumed lost at sea, until they reappeared thousands of miles away in a friendly port. On July 10, 1945, a full 2 months after Germany's unconditional surrender, U-530 surfaced off Mar del Plata, Argentina. Its crew surrendered quietly, but they carried no weapons, no ship's logs, and no clear explanation for their journey. Allied interrogators pressed their captain, Otto Wehrmuth. He refused to answer only one question: who or what was on board before you reached Argentina? Then in August, another ghost sub appeared at the very same port. This was U-977, commanded by Heinz Schaffer. Just like U-530, it had crossed the Atlantic in total secret, surfacing only at night. Schaffer claimed his men fled Norway after the surrender because they were unwilling to fall into British hands, but his account was implausible. He claimed a non-stop 66-day underwater journey. Allied experts said that was impossible, even for a Type 21. The submarine's known endurance and fuel limits were far less than that. They had to have stopped somewhere. Investigators suspected something far more deliberate. They believe both vessels had already delivered their high-value passengers and cargo along the remote coast of Patagonia before surrendering, and gossip travels quickly. Local fishermen who work the waters around Patagonia started telling stories. They mentioned seeing strange boats unloading metal cases onto rubber dinghies, all under the cover of moonlight. Later on, they said heavy trucks carried the cargo inland. The trucks were all heading in one direction, toward Bariloche. This was an area that was soon to become notorious for its large, insular German communities. Not a single one of those crates was ever discovered. Decades later, the revelation made by Officer K provided a spine-chilling explanation. He said that Operation Seawolf was not a legend. It was a fully sanctioned evacuation scheme created by Bormann and Dönitz. The U-boats, he claimed, did not just transport riches. They transported key personalities from the Nazi elite, top scientists, and, as he put it, one passenger of the highest importance. He told of coded messages he helped send from Kiel to the Canary Islands. These messages confirmed the safe departure of Cargo 1 and Cargo 2. When naval files were declassified years later, analysts found evidence to back his story. There were radar traces of unidentified submarines heading south in May 1945. There were strange radio transmissions near the Canary Islands, which was Seawolf's purported staging area. Investigations on both U-530 and U-977 confirmed the presence of large, unusual hollows in their structural design. These spaces were not on the original blueprints. They were perfect for hiding people or goods. The captains, of course, characterized them as extra supply compartments. But no one ever came forward to explain why the ship's logs were destroyed or why the crews remained silent for decades. The officer's testimony brought the pieces of the puzzle together. He mentioned one submarine in particular. This one, he said, was committed to take the leader with his lady from the Canary Islands to South America after a brief stopover in Spain. Initially, we were not aware of it, he stated, but as the crew was put on special alert, it became crystal clear who he was. This rat line, this wolf's route, ended in Argentina. And the reason it was so successful was simple. The government was expecting them. Argentina, under Juan Domingo Perón, had become more than a refuge. It was a sanctuary built for ghosts. Behind its facade of neutrality lay a network of secret pacts, covert deals, and political favors. At the center stood Perón and a web of German-Argentine businessmen who had been preparing since 1943. Bormann's network relied on powerful intermediaries. The most powerful was Ludwig Freud, an Argentine industrialist and a close personal ally of Perón. Freud's job was to secure visas, buy property, and provide political protection for the new arrivals. In return, they brought technical expertise and all that money. The officer's testimony gave a more sinister connotation to this. He recounted that on May 6, 1945, he was supervising the deployment of special passengers from a ship under total radio silence. Among the passengers, there was a man in a gray coat and a wide-brimmed hat, encircled by guards. They were mute, he recounted, but when one of the locals extended his hand, the man raised his arm instead, slowly and intentionally. No one had any doubts about his identity. This wasn't just a few desperate men escaping. This was the organized, well-funded relocation of an entire shadow government. Declassified documents later confirmed that Argentina was the key spot for the escape of war criminals, scientists from new weapons programs, and financial moguls. They all settled down with new identities using official Argentine papers. Bariloche, the mountains, the lakes, these were not random spots. They were specific coordinates on Bormann's map. They had the money, the route, and the new home. The world's most wanted man was about to begin his second life. The world's biggest lie. Hidden deep within the Patagonian wilderness, far from the ruins of Europe, a new and secret chapter of history unfolded. To the world, Adolf Hitler was gone. His remains burned in the wreckage of his empire. But in the quiet alpine valleys near Bariloche, Argentina, whispers told a very different story. They spoke of a frail yet still commanding man, a man living behind guarded gates on the remote shores of Lake Nahuelhuapi. The locals called the estate Inalco. It was a secluded mansion designed by the famous Argentine architect Alejandro Bustillo and financed through mysterious, untraceable funds. According to Officer K's testimony, this was where the Führer began his secret life in exile. This was the new Berghof. The journey from Spain to Argentina, the officer said, unfolded in stages. After the flight from Berlin and a stay in a safe house in Spain, the group boarded a ship disguised as a Red Cross vessel. The Atlantic crossing took weeks. All under total radio silence on board was a man whose eyes were shadowed and voice hoarse from exhaustion. The crew knew him only as the Patient. When they finally reached the coast of Argentina, Perón's contacts ensured a silent arrival. There were no customs, no passports. The man and his auburn-haired companion, believed to be Eva Braun, were driven inland for days to their new custom-built refuge in Patagonia. Inalco was a fortress disguised as a home. Built directly into the hillside, it allegedly contained vast underground storerooms, reinforced concrete walls, its own power generation, escape tunnels, and a private dock on the lake. It was perfectly secluded. Though no German flag flew, the officer claimed the interior reflected the Old Reich. There was Bavarian furniture, portraits of Prussian kings, and even tableware reportedly taken from the Berghof. The guards were former SS men posing as groundskeepers and workers. They patrolled the surrounding forest armed. It was a phantom echo of the Reich, Officer K recalled. Everything the same, only smaller, quieter, hidden. By 1947, rumors of high-ranking Germans settling in Patagonia had begun to spread, but few questioned them. The Perón government had quietly granted hundreds, if not thousands, of visas to Europeans under false identities. Bariloche, with its alpine charm and large German-speaking community, became the ideal cover. Hitler and Braun, it was said, lived under the simple names Herr and Frau Fischer. Neighbors characterized them as courteous but not approachable. The man was hardly ever seen. And when he was always dressed in black, wearing sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, even on cloudy days. He walked with a slow pace, but when he stepped into a room, the discussion was muted, one local resident later narrated. Medical supplies were sent regularly from Buenos Aires. A physician identified as Dr. Otto Lehmann came every 3 months. The officer said the Führer was in a bad state. He had a severe tremor, high blood pressure, and increasing paranoia. But he was still meeting with other Germans, men who came over disguised as tourists. These meetings were clandestine. Later declassified papers indicated a vast communication network between fugitive Nazis all over South America, in Argentina, Chile, and Paraguay. It was all run through the financial channels set up by Martin Bormann. They named it Das Spinnennetz, the spider net, the officer revealed. It was a way to keep their ideology, their riches, and their silence alive. For years, the idea of Hitler living in Argentina was just a rumor. But declassified FBI reports from 1947 to 1955 show the agency was taking it very seriously. The files mention multiple credible sightings and intercepted communications referring to the Old Man. A secret memo from 1948 suggested a German enclave near Bariloche that was so well guarded it was even out of reach for local authorities. Yeah, about that. Why would the Allies let this happen? The Cold War was heating up. The real enemy was now the Soviet Union. A dead Hitler was simple. A fugitive Hitler, protected by a South American ally? That was a political nightmare no one wanted to touch. The officer, however, was adamant that it was not a myth. He lived quietly like a person waiting for a train that would never arrive, he said. He was fond of gardening. He was a reader. He still had the faith that his time would come again. But the story doesn't end there. For the world to believe he was gone, the story of his demise in Berlin had to be solid, and the deeper investigators dug, the more that story unraveled. The world accepted the image, the pistol, the cyanide, the 2 burning bodies in the courtyard. But it was all theater. The Soviets claimed to have recovered Hitler's remains, yet they withheld them for years. Western intelligence always doubted the tale. History says he perished in Berlin. This officer says he passed away in Argentina. Could the world's greatest monster have simply retired? Let us know what you believe. Like and subscribe for more secrets.